right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power. I've got a couple of interesting stories for you guys today. The first story that I've got for you guys today, we are now under 2 weeks out from the Indy Pro. And one guy that I've had my eye on in that lineup that's been really impressive and that is not really getting talked as much about as Blessing and as Justin, because he hasn't competed as recently as Justin and he doesn't have as big of a following as Blessing. But Charles Griffin, he posted this posing update today. And I'm telling you guys, man, I think this guy is going to be the biggest surprise of that show. I said it before. I said it a couple times, actually. I think this is the best I've ever seen him look. I think this is the best and the most controlled I've ever seen his midsection. I think this is probably the grainiest I've ever seen him look during a prep for a show. And he's not a small guy either. I mean, you talk about Blessing and Justin, and these are guys that get close to 300 pounds in the offseason. Justin's like in the 270s on stage. But Charles looks crazy, man, and I honestly think he has a shot. I would even go this far. I would say he's got a shot to win the show. So not only did he post this posing video today, but there was a really impressive update that he posted a couple days ago, underneath the goon light, mind you, that I thought was incredibly impressive because he's hitting a vacuum pose. And I just talked about the fact how his midsection looks a lot smaller and a lot more controlled than usual. And he even said, he went on the record to say the reason for that is because of the fact that he's been putting a pretty heavy emphasis on practicing the vacuum pose. But look at how deep of a vacuum he's hitting in this picture. I don't think I've seen a current men's open pro hit a vacuum this good or this deep. I think this is the best vacuum pose in men's open right now. I remember when Classic Physique first came around in 2016, and we saw these guys hitting vacuum poses for the first time on a professional bodybuilding stage in a really long time. And back then, in that era of men's open bodybuilding, it seemed like so unrealistic that we would ever see a men's open bodybuilder hit a pose like that. That was how different Classic was from men's open, because they were doing these poses that men's open guys just could not do. And back then the conversation was like, imagine if a men's open guy could hit a vacuum pose. And now we're seeing guys like Charles put a focus on that in their training, and I think that should be commended. It's not necessarily necessary. There's no mandatory pose that requires a vacuum in men's open bodybuilding, but I still think it's very cool to see. But shout out to Charles, man. I really think he looks great. Now, speaking of physique updates, another guy that we got a physique update from recently was Lee Priest. Now, as you guys know, Lee Priest is in the middle of a little bit of a transformation right now. He's working with Dave Palumbo. He's coaching him. He's getting his diet back on track, and he's trying to really focus on bringing his physique back as much as he possibly can. And he posted this side chest, and if you go back to the first updates that we saw of Lee when he was starting this transformation, this first picture was taken on March 29th. The very beginning of his transformation, that side chest there. If you compare that to how he looks now, he's made, I think, pretty significant progress. He definitely looks a lot sharper. He definitely looks a lot leaner. You can see a lot more vascularity. You can see a lot more detail in his arms. And I think it's interesting that at 49 years old, he chose to make this transformation. I think it really adds an extra element of mystery and excitement when you combine this with the fact that the Masters Mr. Olympia is coming back, and you think about the guys from that generation that are in that age range that would be able to compete in a Masters Olympia. They're guys from Lee Priest era. Lee Priest would likely be, I mean, he said he doesn't have any intention on doing it at this point. But think about, I mean, how many other bodybuilders from that generation in Lee's age range are in the kind of shape that Lee's in now. So if anybody was going to do the Masters Olympia, it would be a guy that still looks like Lee. Now, granted, he did have that nerve injury, which allowed him to, or I guess disallowed him from training one half of his body the way that he needed to. So he has kind of that imbalance from the left to the right, and symmetry is very important in bodybuilding. So who knows if it would even be worth his time to compete. But it's cool to see. You guys know that Lee always had one of my favorite physiques, especially when he was like in his mid to early 20s, the blonde myth era Lee Priest. So it's cool to see him getting back in this kind of shape. Now, next up in the news, let's talk about this Arnold Classic UK debacle. So there's been a lot of news lately about the Arnold Classic UK. The promoters of that show, Two Bros Pro Events, there was basically just a lot of instances of shady business practice, some allegations like that. But essentially the news of the last 2 days was that the Arnold Classic UK might not happen. The news was that it might be done, as you can see here in this article posted by UK Beef Magazine. Now, interestingly enough, today we got an update on that situation to where it appears that the Arnold Sports Festival UK will still be happening. So on their official Instagram account, the Arnold Sports UK announced that we are proud to announce that the team at the Arnold Sports Festival UK and Two Bros Pro Events Ltd have reached a guaranteed deal in the best interest for real bodybuilding athletes, fans, and sponsors around the world. Yes, the Arnold Pro Qualifier and the Arnold Classic, which is the professional division, is 100% confirmed for the 23rd, 24th, and the 25th of September. We are all ready to emulate the success of last year's show, stopping extravaganza in 2022. So that's the update as of right now. A lot of people were asking me, they were seeing all this stuff going around that the Arnold Classic UK might not happen. Right now, it looks like they're saying it will go on and happen regardless. So that's the update. Now, let's flip back over to another Indie Pro update, because we just talked about Charles Griffin, who I think is a guy that's a little bit of a wild card in that lineup. He's not talked about as much, but I think he's got a shot at winning. Another guy that I think is a wild card here is Petar Klancir. He just posted this update at 13 days out, where he looks pretty gnarly too. I think, from a size standpoint, that's what I'm going to be curious to see how he stacks up against these guys on stage, because we haven't seen him next to, I don't think any of the guys in the lineup have competed against him yet. But in his pictures, at least, he looks pretty big and he looks pretty dense, but we're not really going to know for sure until we see him on stage next to these guys. And his conditioning looks pretty good too, so he might be another guy that kind of comes out of nowhere and finds himself in one of the top callouts for top 3 at the Indie Pro. And by the way, a lot of people were asking me if the Indie Pro will be live streamed in less than 2 weeks, and the answer is yes. And I believe it's only going to be $9.99 for that live stream, so there will be an Indie Pro live stream. I think they're having Bob Ciccarello do the commentary for that. So that'll be cool, but what do you guys think about Petar Klancir? Do you think he's got a shot in this lineup at being one of the top guys? I mean, it's really hard to say. And these updates, like I said, he looks big, he looks dense, he looks hard. But these guys, they look like they're coming correct. Actually, as a matter of fact, we'll go ahead and put a side-by-side here just to kind of show my point. Justin just posted, Justin Rodriguez, who won last year's Indie Pro, and we just saw him do very well at the Arnold Classic. He did very well at the Boston Pro. He's doing the Indie Pro this year. He posted a physique update today, also a most muscular, and this was a little bit closer, not 13 days out, but I guess we're 11 days out now. But we know that Justin is a really big guy. He weighs in the high 270s, pretty close up to the show, and I think he competes close to 270 on stage. So he's a big dude. But when you put the Instagram pictures side by side, Petar looks pretty damn big in that update next to Justin Rodriguez, and Justin's a big guy. So that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make with, on Instagram he looks big, but we're really going to have to wait until we see him on stage next to a guy like Justin to see if that really translates to the stage, because sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't at all. But comparing these pictures, at least, it looks like he could give Justin a run for his money based on what we're seeing from him on his Instagram. In any case, though, I think the Indie Pro is going to shake up to be an interesting show, and I think the results are going to be interesting as well. Now, speaking of Lee Priest earlier, in the Masters Mr. Olympia, that reminded me of a physique update that Dexter posted like a day ago. So Dexter Jackson, as you guys know, retired a couple years back. He's obviously into his 50s now. And ever since he retired, he's been doing, what I think is the smart thing and really downsizing his physique. And he's showing off kind of this new post-retirement, slimmer, healthier, leaner physique. And of course, whenever he posts a physique update, people message me and say, Masters Mr. Olympia, do you think Dexter's going to come back? And the truth is, my opinion is a couple things. A, I think Dexter looks fantastic. B, I think Dexter is doing the smart thing here. C, to answer the question, no, I don't think he's going to come back and do the Masters Mr. Olympia. And D, I don't think he should come back and do the Masters Mr. Olympia. Dexter has nothing left to prove. He's already won the Olympia title. He's already won a Masters Mr. Olympia title. He's won more titles overall than anybody else in the history of bodybuilding. He's the winningest bodybuilder in history. He didn't win the most Olympia titles, but he's won the most titles, period. Dexter has nothing to prove to anybody. I think he should focus on living his life, spending time with his family, being healthy, and kind of leave bodybuilding in the past. I don't think there's ever any reason for him to come back. He's got nothing to prove. But I do think he looked great in this update. And the final story that I have for you guys today, unfortunately, is a sad story. Bodybuilder Ed Giuliani passed away on Sunday, actually, Sunday, May 1st, but it was just announced and everybody realized it today. At the age of 87 years old, Eddie was a former Mr. World winner. I believe it was the 1975 Mr. World. He was also inducted into the Muscle Beach Hall of Fame, and he was inducted by Al Pacino, interestingly enough, at that Hall of Fame ceremony, so that was pretty cool. But I was trying to think of how most people might know who Ed Giuliani is. And you guys might remember that scene from Pumping Iron. I bet that's the most well-known, cameo that he had. That kind of intro scene of Pumping Iron where Arnold walks back into Gold's Gym for the first time in a while, I guess. He's the guy that runs up to Arnold and kind of jumps on him and gives him a big hug. That's who Ed Giuliani was, and that's probably how the vast majority of people would know who he is. So rest in peace to Ed Giuliani, 87 years old, a true bodybuilding legend. That's going to wrap it up for the video today, guys. I hope you did, in fact, enjoy it. Make sure you give it a thumbs up. Leave a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you have not subscribed already. Click that bell notification icon. As always, I love you guys. I appreciate you guys. Nick Strength and Power, signing out.